My name is Lee Speigel, and I'm a journalist, writer, producer based out of New York City. And I can't believe it, for 46 years now, I've been researching and investigating unidentified flying objects, or more commonly known as UFOs. And what first caught my eye about this was back in 1973, while I was in New York doing other work. There was a wave of sightings across the country that suddenly, for some reason, hit the news media. Usually, scattered UFO sightings would rarely make your 11 o'clock news because it just simply wasn't as important or interesting to the news people. But all of a sudden, with so many sightings across the country, it just caught my attention. And so I started researching, I started reading books about it. And the more I read, the more I realized that there's something really there that should not be promoting ridicule of people who claim that they've seen certain things. And I came up with an idea to try and approach a major record company, a recording company in New York City. It was CBS, and at the time they were putting record albums on television. They were selling albums in early infomercials on TV. And I thought, yeah, now that's an idea because nobody has ever sold a UFO album on TV. And I thought, boy, if I could convince them to give me the front money that I asked for and go around the country and interview scientists, military people, law enforcement people, astronauts, a variety of people who were credible and who either had strong opinions about UFOs or had had their own experiences and didn't mind talking about it. So I had friends in the entertainment world who had contacts, and they got me a meeting at CBS. And I pitched them, and they said, okay, it sounds like an interesting idea. They gave me the money, and it launched me for my first trip ever, flying and going around the country with a tape recorder and interviewing people who I had read about in at least one particular book called Beyond Earth, Man's Contact with UFOs by Ralph and Judy Blum. These people had written a great book, like a primer book on UFOs. And with their help, I was then able to contact the people in the book that I wanted to talk to. And I came back to New York with a variety of interviews. And we put this thing together in the studio. I wrote the script, co-produced it. Well, actually, I wrote the script, produced it, and it was called UFOs, The Credibility Factor. And at first, CBS didn't like the title. They said, what does that mean? What do you mean credibility? What does that mean? I said, are you kidding? Credibility. That means everything about UFOs that I'm interested in has to have something to do with credibility. Otherwise, I'm not interested in touching it at all. And they said, okay, well, what do you mean credibility factor? Are you kidding? This is the credibility factor of UFOs. It's plain and simple. That's the title. And they said, okay, we'll go for it. And the record album came out. We released it in the beginning of 1976 on television. And it was great to see an actual UFO, to see a UFO ad on TV with portions of the album being listened to and viewed on the screen. It was great. The album was well received. And after I did the album and had a little bit of notoriety because of how credible it was, I wanted to do something else to follow it up. But I didn't want to just maintain it to one thing like an album again. I wanted to reach a bigger audience. And to me, living in New York, the biggest audience that I could find was the United Nations. And I thought, boy, if I could get into the United Nations and do anything there about UFOs and to bring some of the people there with me who were on my album, that would be amazing. Well, I found out very quickly that if you want to do anything at the United Nations, you can't just walk up and knock on the door and say, hello, my name is Lee Speigel. Who do I talk to about doing a presentation here about UFOs? Well, how long after that do you think the United Nations Security Force would be coming after me? So I looked around, I asked around, and people said to me, if you want to do anything at the UN, You have to be part of a delegation. You have to be a delegate of a country that's interested in this topic and that wouldn't mind sponsoring your proposal. So in 1977, I started seeing and hearing about these speeches that were being made at the UN by the Prime Minister of the little Caribbean country known as Grenada. He was trying to get the UN to create a committee that would investigate, study, and share UFO information internationally among all the nations. And as it turned out, they weren't paying any attention to him. And even the media didn't really care what he was talking about because he's a little country, a little nation. Nobody cared what he was interested in. But I figured, hey, he's the only game in town. So I hatched a plan, and I called the ambassadors at the mission, the official Grenada mission in New York. And I introduced myself to them and told them that I had produced a very credible record album, and I would like to come to their office and give them a copy of the album that they could give as a gift to the Prime Minister with my compliments, because I think I can help all of you with your idea of doing UFOs at the United Nations. Shortly after I left my record album in the hands of the ambassadors at Grenada, they called and said that the Prime Minister was coming to New York and he was going to be knighted as Sir Eric Gairy in a big ceremony. And would I like to come and witness the ceremony and then have a private meeting with the Prime Minister to talk about my proposal? I said, yes, of course. I'd love to do that. And I went. It was a beautiful evening, lots of flags and people and great food and international cuisine and stuff. And when it was all over and he was knighted, they brought me and him into a room, just the two of us, and we shook hands. And he said that he enjoyed all of the album that he listened to. He loved the voices. He knew who these people were, but he had never thought to even contact them because he didn't know how to contact them. And so he asked me what my idea was. And I said, listen, Mr. Prime Minister, with all due respect, you've been trying to get the United Nations to pay attention to your crusade to get the United Nations to create an international study committee on UFOs. And for what it's worth, and I'm sure you know this, they're not paying attention to you. There's been no movement here. On the other hand, I know people from my album, and now that you know who the people were who were on the album, I can bring the people who were on my album, the scientists, the military, the astronaut. I can bring these people to the United Nations if you were to sponsor my proposal, and we could work on it together. And he thought about it. He said, it's an excellent idea. Let's do it. I said, okay. And handshake deal. It was the beginning of the rest of the year, 1978. Shortly after that happened, I received in the mail a little yellow card that was my actual, now official Grenada delegates card, which meant I could take this card, go to the United Nations, go to the security desk, show it to them, and they let me in with no problem. I didn't have to go knocking on the door. And I used that card many times to go there to have meetings with people, going through documents and any materials that I wanted to use and gather for the rest of the year before the big presentation in November. And that's how the rest of the year just followed through, with my traveling around and gathering all the material and the people to put this thing together. And we pulled it off on November 27th, 1978. The media was there, and a lot of the countries were represented there. And my main speakers at the United Nations were Dr. J. Allen Hynek, who was the former 20-year scientific consultant to the Air Force's Project Blue Book, their big UFO investigation. After Hynek spoke, Dr. Jacques Vallée, astrophysicist, who was the real-life scientist who was portrayed in the movie Close Encounters of the Third Kind. One of the other participants who couldn't be there at the meeting because he was out of the country, but he wanted to be part of it was former astronaut, one of America's first astronauts, Gordon Cooper. And so I asked him if he would just put a letter together and send it to me that I could then give to Grenada, and we could make 1,000,000 copies of it, basically outlining his views as a former test pilot, astronaut, and letting us know what he thinks UFOs are and why astronauts in general don't like talking about UFOs. So he put this beautiful letter together. I got it. I passed it on to the Grenada people. They were happy. We had all kinds of documents that really made the case for what I was thinking was disclosure about UFOs at the time. All the speakers came. We did the presentation. We had a morning session, an afternoon session, with a press conference in between. And after the press conference, we were back into the special political committee room where nuclear physicist Stan Friedman gave his speech and told the global audience that it's his very strong opinion that there's evidence that indicates that some UFOs are interplanetary space vehicles visiting Earth. He's always had this opinion, but he's very strong about that. And so when it was all over and all said and done, there were many nations that were interested in at least examining the proposal and maybe considering a committee, a small committee to look into this. But the United States and the then Soviet Union vetoed it and said they weren't interested in it. And when they bowed out, other nations started quietly going away. And it just has been laying dormant there at the United Nations all these years, all these decades for anybody else to come along and try and do it again. People have asked me over the years, why don't you do it again? Why don't you do it again? And I said, I don't have the energy. It took so much energy just to pull it off the first time. I don't think I could go any further with it. However, just case in point, historically, today, 40 years later, after that presentation, there are now many countries that are very interested in, very outspoken, and have open government investigations into UFOs. In fact, there are several countries in South America whose military organizations from one country to another, they're working together now to try and figure out the truth behind this whole UFO thing. That's really great to know that they're actually working together. Normally, you wouldn't think that the military of one country would want to cooperate with the military of another country, but they are. France, for years, has had their own official UFO investigation committee for the government. They're very open about it. So if I were to do something again like that, I would go to all these countries first and say, hey, look at what I did in 1978. Would you be interested in trying something again with me now? But I'm not sure if I'm going to go in that direction. We'll see how tired I am tomorrow. I just don't know. I have heard over the years that there is some alleged love-hate relationship between UFOs and the media. I'm not sure that I would describe it as a love-hate relationship. I think that what people don't understand is UFOs appear over all countries. We already know this. There are vast databases that indicate it's not just an American phenomenon. These things are seen everywhere. And the thing is, they show up whenever and wherever they want. They know that they're being seen, especially at night. There's so many cases where they'll show up over either large populated areas or rural areas, and they'll just put all their lights on. I mean, a couple of years ago, my brother was driving up in New Hampshire with one of my nephews, his son, and they thought they saw a UFO from the car. So they pulled over, they got out of the car, and they realized immediately that this thing was moving in such a way that it was coming in for a final approach landing at a local airport. So, all right, no UFO. They got back into the car and kept driving. And my nephew said, Daddy, why do UFOs have lights? And my brother said, I don't know, but when we get back to the house, let's call Uncle Lee in New York and let's ask him. So they did, and Zachary, my nephew, called and said, Uncle Lee, we thought we saw a UFO tonight, but it turned out that it wasn't. But I want to know, because you know about this stuff. Why do UFOs have lights? And I said, well, Zachary, my first impression, my initial impression is that they have lights so that we can see them, because I think they want to be seen. They certainly don't need their lights to navigate in the air. They probably can do that in the dark because their technology is so much further ahead than ours. They don't need lights like we need lights so that we don't crash into each other. I think that they want to be seen. And it's part of a gigantic teasing of humanity, that these things, and they've been around for nearly 50,000 years, according to the Air Force. I have a document that indicates that's what the Air Force was teaching their cadets back in 1968. In a special science textbook at the Air Force Academy, chapter 33, called Unidentified Flying Objects. The book itself was a physics textbook called Introductory Space Science. And there was a chapter about UFOs. And this book and this chapter was not for publication. The public could not see it. It was only for Air Force cadets, the future Air Force pilots and officers of this country. And it's an amazing document. And I was able to get it through Dr. Hynek. And we made a lot of copies of it and used it as part of our evidence at the United Nations. But essentially, what the Air Force was telling their cadets in 1968, here are some theories. This is what we think may be going on with UFOs. The strongest theory for us is that UFOs are manned or remote-controlled craft operated by beings from another planet or more than one planet. This is a difficult concept to consider, but the evidence suggests that Earth is being visited by several groups of extraterrestrials, maybe 3 or 4 groups at different stages of development. And we know from recorded history that humans have been intermingling with and seeing strange things in the skies going back 50,000 years. That's amazing stuff that they would only tell the cadets. And so this idea of a love-hate relationship it's not just between the UFOs and the media, it's between UFOs and the people of this planet. I don't think the UFOs or the intelligence behind them care about the media. Whatever their agenda is, I don't think they care about media. They know they're being seen. They know when they want to be seen. And you would think that they would just, show themselves. If you're here, show yourselves wherever you are. But they're not doing that. That's done in science fiction movies, where they appear over major cities before they invade us. So it doesn't look like they're here to eat us. And they've been here for a long time, whoever they are. Personally, I don't care. I don't care where they come from. I don't care what they look like. Maybe I care a little bit. I'd like to see what some of them look like, but I basically don't care. It's more important to me that in the work that I do is to try and get people to understand that this whole concept of disclosure, people are always asking me, where is the truth? Why won't there be any disclosure? And my attitude is, and in my presentations now, I say to people at the beginning of a presentation, I say to them, please don't believe anything I'm going to tell you tonight. Just don't, because you shouldn't until you have a really, really good, valid opinion about UFOs and what's going on. And I'm hoping to help you with that opinion tonight. And I'm going to give you many examples of where and why I believe disclosure has already happened many, many times in our history. It's out there. And all you have to do is look for it, spend the time, maneuver through all the crap that's out there, all of the conspiracy theories that are out there, the hoaxes and everything else. If you can get through there and find yourself on the other side of, to coin a term, the black hole of UFOs, you will find like, oh, I didn't realize that before. I didn't know that. Oh, I'm glad that I looked up this thing, and I'm glad I found out. We live in a world where, oh my gosh, use the internet. Even though there's so much bad stuff on the internet, and people take advantage of true believers, and they post things and pictures and ideas, there's a lot of great stuff there too that you can find if you take the time. So I'm firmly convinced there's been a lot of disclosure. I've seen it, and it's out there. One very strong example of disclosure, certainly for me, was the 1978 UFO UN presentation that I produced. I brought a lot of people together to talk to the nations of the world with strong pieces of evidence that there should be a scientific investigation, global investigation of UFOs. And we were very careful not to include the phrase, we're being visited by extraterrestrials, let's find out what these alien ships are all about. Never. I never make a statement where I say, oh yeah, I think they're from the Pleiades or Alpha Centauri, or I think they're living on the moon. I don't say anything like that publicly, because if I can't prove it, keep my mouth shut. It's much better to talk about examples of disclosure. So that was one. Earlier than that, in 1947, there was a famous memo that was written by Lieutenant General Nathan Twining of the Air Materiel Command. And he urged a major investigation of what they called the flying discs back then. And in it, there's the very top of the memo, which was top secret at first. He said, the phenomenon that's reported is real. It's not visionary. It's not fictitious. People shouldn't be ridiculed. And objects are being seen that approximate the size of man-made aircraft. They're circular, some with a dome on top. And he goes on to explain the maneuverability characteristics of these UFOs. And basically saying we need to really discover what's behind the phenomenon and see what we're going to do about this, and if it has implications to our national security. Well, that Twining Memo then became the first part of a major Air Force investigation, and it was called Project Sign. And then Project Sign became Project Grudge. And then after that, it morphed into what we now know as Project Blue Book. And that's how Project Blue Book came along. And now, Project Blue Book spent more than 2 decades looking into UFOs. There's a very popular television series right now that's just been renewed for another season called Project Blue Book, based on the reports and the history of Project Blue Book. And yet, when the pressure was on the Air Force to come up with something to give to the public, in 1969, it was decided to end Project Blue Book. They closed the books. They issued final conclusions about their UFO studies, saying that in all the years we've been studying this, more than like 13,000 reports, we've come to the conclusion that there was nothing that indicated anything there of any kind of scientific value, nothing that would indicate these UFO things were a threat to our national security, and that there was nothing that indicated that any of them were interplanetary alien vehicles. So it's like, we're shutting the doors, move along, there's nothing more to see here. And yet, that was 1969. But in 68, as I had mentioned before, the Air Force had put together a whole chapter on UFOs for their cadets, in which they had all these other statements in that chapter that basically screamed of disclosure, screamed of scientific investigation was needed. But then, like a year later, Project Blue Book closed, and then the Air Force went in and they revised that chapter, and it was changed, and it was reprinted for the cadets with new information. Just amazing how they could do things behind the scenes. The public would never know this. It's amazing. So those are a couple examples of what I think are real disclosure. In 2005, former President Bill Clinton was in Hong Kong giving a speech. And one of the members of the audience asked him to talk about his interest in UFOs, because people had known that he had tried to investigate some things when he was president. And he said to the audience, and he was very serious about it, he said, yeah, when I was president, I looked into what may have happened in Roswell, New Mexico in 1947. Was there a UFO crash there? And I also made some inquiries about Area 51, the secret base that we have outside of Las Vegas. He said, basically, there was nothing there that was given to me or told to me of any interest of anything that related to UFOs or extraterrestrials. And then he said, and anybody can go on YouTube and look at this video. He said, look, I would not be the first president who had been lied to by his underlings, who kept things from him so that they could just wait him out until he was out of office and basically wait for the next guy to come in, the next president. They could go through the same thing. He said there could be a bureaucratic person out there who's just waiting and has secret files, and that it may be part of the system where this information is not given to elected presidents. He said, if they have it, it eluded me. They successfully eluded me, and I'm even embarrassed to say that I tried to look into it. And I saw this video and I thought, that's disclosure. It screams of disclosure. The fact that he, Clinton, president, would suggest the possibility that elected presidents are not given the stuff that he didn't have a need to know, or high enough security clearance to be told certain things. Why? I mean, it raises the question of who's really in charge here. If the president of the United States, if the commander-in-chief of our armed forces doesn't have a clue or is not told what may be going on, then who does know? Who's making the decisions? And again, I think it's important to stress, it's not just an American situation. All leaders of all countries, they know that there are things flying around in their skies above their countries that can come and go as they want. And when they send up their jet fighters to try and chase these things or force them down, the fighters are outmaneuvered by these craft and by these lights and whatever. Most countries that have jet fighter pilots have the same kind of stories coming out. And a lot of these countries now are starting to talk about it. That is disclosure. Can't get around it. The definition of disclosure by dictionaries is something that is told that wasn't known before. To disclose something. Okay, when countries are starting to talk and be open about what's going on in the skies above their countries, isn't that disclosure? Or am I wrong? I'm not making this stuff up. My whole attitude these days is anything that I can find that even hints of disclosure, I think is worth getting out to people. And none of this has to include the phrase, oh, I think that we're being visited by someone from another planet. You don't need that. You don't need to make that kind of stuff up. Whatever these things are, whatever they turn out to be, whatever or whoever controls them, they know what they're doing. They have their own agenda. If they want to show themselves, they can, but they're not doing that. In the Bible, there are many instances of strange circular craft that was seen in the skies, and painters of like the Renaissance and medieval times would paint incredible pictures of people and places and things, and occasionally they would put like a circular object in the painting in the sky above above the baby Jesus Christ and Mary, John the Baptist. There was like this circular thing, sometimes with beams of light coming out of these things in paintings that are like hanging in national galleries around the world. My question is, why did the artists include these strange things in the sky? Was it just some kind of religious symbolism? And if so, what symbolism? Who were the things that were inside these strange craft? Were they angels of the Lord? I mean, what's the point when there's so many things that were painted? Even, and I go back even further in my presentation. I show illustrations of cave drawings from early humans on caves from like Australia and Africa and Mexico, where the early people who lived in caves, they had no newspapers in which to tell their cave dwellers what happened to them when they went out to hunt for food today. They had nothing to print it on. There was no typewriters, and so they made pigmentations, and they drew things on cave walls. You can see these petroglyphs all over the place on the internet, and in so many of these illustrations, you see illustrations of the people that were out hunting. You see animals that they were trying to kill, and above them, the circular objects. Disclosure. I say in my presentation, I think that the New York Times in New York City, famous newspaper, and its motto is all the news that's fit to print. Very famous motto. I say they borrowed that motto from ancient cave dwellers, because ancient cave dwellers painting what they saw with things in the sky, that was all the news that's fit to paint. You know, I often say to people, if you take a group of people, 10 people, line them up, and start with a person on one end, and just say to that person, what would it take for you to believe that Earth is being visited by someone? What would it take you to believe? Blah, blah, blah. And you can go down the line, and you can get 10 different answers. One person might say, I would like the news to come out that something just landed on the White House lawn. Next person would say, I would like to see a fleet of ships appear over the city, just like that. Another person would say, I would like an announcement from the White House, the actual president of the United States, holding a press conference in the press room and announcing that there is now evidence that we're being visited. Another person would say, I would like to see more and more people abducted or allegedly abducted and have those stories increase. You could get so many stories, and yet the bottom line is no matter what they say they want that could convince them, it doesn't matter what people say, because we don't know what the agenda is of whatever's in control of these UFOs. If they want to show themselves in a mass showing over every major city in the world, they'll do it. But they don't do that. Why? What's their purpose? Are we some kind of experiment that they dropped here eons ago? They placed humans on this planet to thrive once the planet became habitable by humans, and now they're kind of coming back periodically to check on the experiment. I mean, I don't know. There are too many theories out there. Are they coming from other planets? Are they coming from other galaxies? Are they coming from other dimensions or other realities in the universe? Are they coming from another universe? Again, that's up to the scientists to speculate on. But even then, it's in the end, it's inevitably up to the UFO intelligence itself to decide what it's going to do. We have nothing to do with that. We just can't. We can't reach out and say, please land. We can't reach out to them in big announcements and say, please help us. We are a world that's filled with big problems. We need your help. Please help us. Please save us. Please stop the growing climate problem. You must have the technology to be able to help us. all that stuff just doesn't matter. Whoever is driving these vehicles, they know what they're doing. And I don't believe that I'm going to see the major announcement or the major disclosure or the revelation of them. I don't think that that's going to happen in my lifetime. I think we're still not ready yet as a species. I don't think we're ready to be invited into their galactic, Starfleet Federation or whatever they have. We're not ready. I think it's really important that people, all of us, remain skeptics, but open-minded skeptics. There is no room in this field for ridicule of any kind. The ridicule generally comes from the hard-nosed debunkers, whose job it is, and they relish the fact that they'll do whatever they can to explain away every single UFO sighting. And literally, statistically, it's about, I'm going to say 90%, maybe a little higher, 90% of UFO reports can be explained by easy things, ordinary things, astronomical things, weather things, misidentifications of aircraft. I'm not interested in those. I'm only interested in that smaller 4 or 5% that are never properly explained. And it's hard for the debunkers to attack those because they try and come up with an explanation for something, and it just doesn't always hold water. But they'll do whatever they can to kind of force the issue and end up ridiculing someone. People have lost their jobs, their families, their friends, going back historically, because they dared to speak out and talk about this thing that they saw in their backyard. When I do a presentation, I'll say to people, give me a show of hands. How many of you think that you've seen something unexplained in the skies during the daytime or nighttime? And like a big portion of the hands go up. And then I'll say to them, how many of you reported it? Can you imagine how few hands go up at that point? People have been afraid to report. There's so many more stories out there to be told. People need to know that there'll be a place where they can go in safety and to be able to just tell what happened to them without fear of ridiculing. Nobody likes to be ridiculed. Nobody. That's not good for the psyche, for the consciousness. And so there has to be better dialogue between the powers that be, meaning the governmental powers or the military, and eyewitnesses and science. Science has to let down its guard and go into it, looking into things in a scientific method, but not to ridicule people. You just can't do it. I just wish that we could all remain open-minded skeptics. If you're interested in finding out more about me, I've got a website called leespeigel.com. It's Lee, L-E-E, Speigel, Speigel.com. I will also very soon be premiering a new radio show called Edge of Reality Radio. That's going to be on KGRA Digital. My show is going to be on weekly for 2 hours, and it can be heard all over the world. And I'm going to be bringing amazing guests on to talk about amazing things, not just UFOs, but the whole realm of UFOs, paranormal, unexplained. And I want to deliver the attitude of disclosure. Very, very important to me. Capital D, disclosure. That's the next thing that I'm involved with. And I'm also near the end of co-producing a new documentary with the film producer and creator James Fox. And we will unleash that onto the public as soon as possible. And we hope people will really like it. So there's a lot of stuff going on, and I'm anxious to be in the thick of it all as it all unfolds.